There is something people misunderstand about empaths. They think empathy means weakness. They think kindness means blindness. They think patience means tolerance for deception. But the truth is, empaths notice everything. Not because they are magical, not because they can read minds, but because they study emotional patterns every single day without even realizing it. Most people listen to words. Empaths listen to energy, tone shifts, hesitation, body language, emotional timing, facial tension, and silence. And that is why lying to an empath is one of the worst mistakes you can make. When someone lies, the human brain experiences conflict. The words say one thing, but the nervous system communicates another. Micro-expressions change. Vocal rhythm changes. Eye contact changes. Emotional presence changes. An empath feels those inconsistencies immediately. What makes this dangerous is that an empath usually does not react right away. That is the part people fail to understand. An empath will often sit quietly and observe. They will give you opportunities to tell the truth. They will study the pattern before making a decision. Because emotionally intelligent people do not judge based on one mistake. They judge based on repeated behavior. And once the pattern becomes clear, trust begins to die. You see, trust is not destroyed by one giant betrayal. It is destroyed by small moments of emotional dishonesty repeated over time. Every half-truth, every manipulation, every hidden intention, every fake excuse. It slowly teaches the empath one thing: you are not emotionally safe. And the moment an empath no longer feels emotional safety, they begin disconnecting internally. Here is something important about human psychology. People become deeply attached to those who make them feel understood. That is why empaths are unforgettable. They listen deeply. They pay attention. They remember details others ignore. But when you lie to someone like that, you create cognitive dissonance inside the relationship. The empath starts asking, if you cared about me, why hide the truth? If your intentions were genuine, why manipulate reality? If you respected me, why make me question my intuition? And eventually, the empath stops fighting for clarity. They become silent. Now, silence from an empath is very different from silence from other people. It is not emotional weakness. It is emotional withdrawal. That silence means they are processing everything. The problem is, by the time most people notice the silence, the empath is already emotionally leaving. Because empaths do not suddenly detach. They detach slowly after repeated disappointment. This is why manipulators become frustrated with empaths over time. At first, manipulators believe the empath is easy to control because they are compassionate. But compassion is not the absence of intelligence. In fact, emotionally aware people become extremely dangerous to manipulators because they eventually recognize the pattern. They notice the guilt tactics. They notice the inconsistency. They notice the emotional games. And once awareness replaces emotional attachment, manipulation loses power. Here is another psychological truth most people ignore. Lying forces a person to maintain multiple versions of themselves. One version for the truth. One version for the lie. One version for damage control. That creates stress on the nervous system. And empaths pick up on emotional stress quickly. Not because they are psychic. Because humans constantly communicate emotionally beneath language. That is why someone can say, "I'm fine," while their nervous system screams anxiety. Empaths notice the scream beneath the sentence. And eventually they stop believing the words altogether. Now, let's go deeper. Many people lie because they fear consequences. They fear rejection. They fear abandonment. They fear conflict. But ironically, deception creates the exact outcome they trying to avoid. Because an empath can forgive mistakes. They can forgive flaws. They can forgive imperfection. But consistent dishonesty destroys emotional intimacy. Why? Because intimacy requires truth. You cannot build genuine connection on emotional manipulation. You cannot create love while constantly managing appearances. Sooner or later, the mask slips. And when the empath finally sees the full truth, something changes permanently. Not anger, clarity. That is the terrifying part. An empath who reaches clarity becomes emotionally unreachable. The same person who once gave endless understanding suddenly becomes calm, detached, and impossible to manipulate. And people are shocked by this transformation. But the empath did not change overnight. They simply stopped ignoring reality. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming empathy means endless tolerance. Healthy empathy comes with boundaries. And once those boundaries are crossed enough times, the empath chooses peace over chaos. That decision is powerful, because emotionally mature people understand something deeply. Protecting your nervous system is more important than maintaining toxic attachment. So if you are listening to this, understand the lesson carefully. Never lie to someone who genuinely cares about you. Because authentic people are rare. People who truly try to understand your pain are rare. People who offer emotional safety without judgment are rare. And once you lose someone like that through deception, replacements become impossible. You may find attention again. You may find attraction again. But genuine emotional understanding, that is rare. And when it is broken through dishonesty, the loss follows you long after the relationship ends. The truth is simple. Empaths do not leave because of one mistake. They leave because repeated dishonesty teaches them they can no longer trust your reality. And without trust, connection slowly suffocates. TUH. At this, why honesty matters. Not perfection. Honesty, because people can heal from truth. But they struggle to heal from manipulation. Most people believe communication happens through words, but human beings communicate emotionally long before language ever enters the conversation. An empath understands this naturally. They notice the tension behind a smile, the hesitation before an answer, the sudden shift in tone, or the emotional distance that appears when someone is hiding something. While others focus only on what is being said, empaths pay attention to what feels different. This is why empaths detect emotional inconsistencies faster than most people. The human nervous system constantly gives away information. Even when someone tries to appear calm, their body may communicate anxiety. Even when they say they are honest, their emotional rhythm may feel unnatural. Empaths are highly sensitive to these shifts because they observe emotional patterns every single day. They remember how someone normally speaks, reacts, texts, laughs, and behaves. The moment that pattern changes, the empath feels it immediately. This does not mean empaths are mind readers. It means they are emotionally observant. They notice details that emotionally disconnected people ignore. A person may say, "Everything is fine," but their eyes avoid contact, their energy becomes cold, and their responses lose sincerity. Most people will accept the words and move on. The empath feels the contradiction instantly. Their intuition begins connecting the emotional signals beneath the surface. What makes this ability powerful is that empaths usually do not react immediately. They watch quietly. They observe behavior over time. They understand that everyone has emotional moments, stressful days, and temporary confusion. But when inconsistency becomes a pattern, the empath begins recognizing that something deeper is wrong. This is why manipulators often underestimate empaths in the beginning. They take kindness for weakness and patience for ignorance. In reality, the empath is studying everything silently. Emotionally intelligent people understand that truth creates emotional stability, while deception creates emotional confusion. Lies force people to split themselves into multiple versions. One version carries the truth, another carries the lie, and another manages the fear of being exposed. That internal conflict leaks through behavior. It affects body language, facial tension, emotional warmth, and communication style. An empath senses these changes because emotional awareness allows them to notice what words try to hide. This sensitivity often comes from experience. Many empaths have spent years navigating emotionally complicated environments. Some learned to read emotional energy as a survival mechanism. Others became highly aware because they spent their lives caring deeply about people's feelings. Over time, they developed the ability to sense emotional shifts with increased, edible accuracy. They notice when someone becomes emotionally unavailable before anyone else sees it. They feel distance before separation happens. They sense dishonesty before evidence appears. The important thing to understand is that empaths are not searching for flaws in people. Most of the time, they actually want to believe the best in others. But emotional inconsistency creates discomfort inside them because authenticity matters deeply to their nervous system. They value honesty, emotional safety, and genuine connection. When someone's actions no longer match their words, the empath feels emotionally unsettled. Eventually, repeated inconsistency changes how the empath sees the relationship. Trust slowly weakens. Emotional closeness fades. The empath may become quieter, more distant, and more observant. Not because they hate the person, but because their intuition no longer feels safe. And once an empath reaches that stage, Rebuilding trust becomes extremely difficult. They can forgive mistakes, but it is much harder for them to ignore patterns that repeatedly violate emotional truth. Trust is one of the most powerful psychological bonds between human beings. Every healthy relationship, whether emotional, romantic, professional, or personal, is built on the belief that the other person's words and actions align with reality. The moment lies enter the relationship, that foundation begins to crack. What many people fail to understand is that deception does not only hurt emotions, it affects the brain, the nervous system, and the entire sense of emotional safety within a connection. Lies damage trust at both a psychological and neurological level because the human brain is constantly searching for consistency, predictability, and truth. When someone lies, they create confusion inside the other person's mind. The brain naturally tries to connect behavior, tone, actions, and emotional patterns into a stable understanding of reality. Honest communication creates stability because the nervous system feels safe when things make sense emotionally. But deception interrupts that stability. A lie forces the brain to question what is real and what is false. Once this uncertainty begins, the relationship becomes emotionally unstable. Neurologically, trust is deeply connected to safety. When people feel emotionally safe with someone, the nervous system relaxes. Stress levels decrease. Communication flows naturally. The brain releases chemicals associated with bonding, comfort, and connection. But when dishonesty is discovered, the nervous system reacts almost like a threat has appeared. Anxiety increases. Emotional alertness rises. The brain begins scanning for more inconsistencies because it no longer feels secure. This is why even small lies can create large emotional consequences over time. People often believe trust only breaks after massive betrayal, but psychologically, repeated small deceptions slowly train the brain to expect dishonesty. Eve, RY hidden truth, broken promise, manipulative excuse, or half-truth becomes another signal that emotional safety is disappearing. The person may still stay in the relationship physically, but mentally and emotionally, they begin protecting themselves. Once trust is damaged, the brain changes the way it processes the relationship. Conversations become analyzed more carefully. Emotional reactions become guarded. The nervous system becomes hyper-aware of inconsistencies because it no longer feels safe enough to relax. This is why people who have been lied to repeatedly often struggle with overthinking. Their brain is trying to prevent future emotional pain by constantly searching for signs of danger. Lies also damage identity within relationships. When someone discovers deception, they begin questioning not only the liar, but also their own judgment. Thoughts like, "How did I miss this?" or "Was any of it real?" begin affecting self-trust. This creates emotional instability because human beings rely heavily on their perception of reality. Manipulation and dishonesty distort that perception, leaving the mind emotionally exhausted. The psychological damage becomes even deeper when lies are repeated over long periods of time. Chronic deception creates emotional unpredictability, and unpredictability keeps the nervous system in survival mode. The person may become anxious, emotionally distant, irritable, or constantly suspicious. Their body starts preparing for disappointment before it even happens. Over time, this emotional stress affects confidence, sleep, emotional regulation, and the ability to feel secure in future relationships. What makes honesty so powerful is not perfection, but predictability. Human beings can handle difficult truths far better than emotional confusion. Painful honesty still allows the brain to process reality clearly. Lies force the mind into emotional conflict because words and behavior stop matching. That mismatch creates internal stress that slowly destroys intimacy. Once trust is broken deeply enough, rebuilding it becomes extremely difficult because the brain remembers emotional pain. Even after apologies, the nervous system often stays cautious. The relationship may continue, but emotional openness becomes harder to restore. This is why honesty is one of the highest forms of emotional respect. It protects psychological safety, strengthens emotional connection, and allows people to feel secure enough to fully trust another human being. Avoidant and manipulative behaviors create emotional distance long before words ever reveal it. Most people notice disconnection only after communication becomes cold or the relationship starts falling apart, but empaths sense it much earlier. They notice the subtle emotional shifts that happen when someone begins withdrawing, hiding intentions, or controlling the emotional atmosphere of the relationship. Because empaths are highly aware of emotional patterns, they often feel the distance, NCE, before the other person even admits something has changed. Avoidant behavior usually begins quietly. A person may stop expressing emotions openly, become less emotionally available, delay communication, or avoid deeper conversations. On the surface, everything may appear normal, but emotionally, something feels different. The warmth decreases. The energy changes. Responses become shorter, less sincere, or emotionally disconnected. An empath notices this immediately because they are deeply sensitive to emotional consistency. They remember how someone behaves when they feel safe and emotionally present. The moment that emotional rhythm changes, the empath feels the tension internally. Manipulative behavior creates a different kind of emotional distance. Instead of honest withdrawal, manipulation creates confusion. One moment the person is warm and affectionate, and the next moment they become distant, cold, or emotionally unavailable without explanation. This inconsistency destabilizes the emotional environment of the relationship. The empath begins feeling emotionally exhausted because manipulation forces the nervous system into constant uncertainty. Human beings naturally seek emotional predictability because it creates safety. Honest relationships feel calm because communication and behavior align. But manipulative people often create emotional chaos intentionally or unconsciously. They may use guilt, silent treatment, mixed signals, blame shifting, or emotional withholding to maintain control over the relationship. While others may struggle to recognize these patterns at first, empaths usually sense the emotional imbalance very quickly. What makes this painful is that empaths often try to understand the behavior before judging it. They know people carry trauma, fear, insecurity, and emotional wounds. Because of this, they tend to give multiple chances. They try to communicate gently. They try to reconnect emotionally. But avoidant and manipulative people often mistake patience for weakness. Instead of becoming more honest, they continue repeating the pattern, believing the empath will always tolerate it. The problem is that emotional distance affects the empath deeply because they connect through emotional energy, not surface interaction. Someone can still text, call, laugh, or spend time together while emotionally disappearing internally. Most people focus on physical presence, but empaths notice emotional absence. They feel when conversations lose authenticity. They feel when affection becomes performative instead of genuine. They feel when someone is emotionally guarding themselves or hiding their true intentions. Avoidant people often fear vulnerability and emotional closeness. Instead of expressing fear directly, they create space emotionally. They may avoid difficult conversations, suppress emotions, or pull away when intimacy becomes too real. Manipulative individuals, on the other hand, may use emotional inconsistency to gain reassurance, attention, control, or power. Both behaviors create instability inside the relationship, and instability is exhausting for emotionally aware people. An empath may initially try harder when they feel this distance. They may become more understanding, more patient, and more emotionally supportive. But over time, repeated emotional inconsistency begins damaging trust. The empath starts realizing they are carrying the emotional weight of the relationship alone. Instead of feeling connected, they begin feeling emotionally drained. Eventually, the empath stops chasing clarity. They stop trying to force emotional honesty from someone who refuses to give it freely. This is the moment the relationship begins changing permanently. The empath becomes quieter, more detached, and more protective of their emotional energy. Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally recognize that emotional safety cannot exist where manipulation and avoidance continue unchecked. Deepest connections require emotional transparency, accountability, and honesty. Without those qualities, emotional distance grows silently until even love can no longer hold the relationship together. And empaths feel that distance long before anyone else notices it exists. One of the most misunderstood things about an empath is their silence. People often assume silence means weakness, confusion, or emotional dependence. But in reality, silence from an empath usually means they are observing, processing, and emotionally detaching. Unlike impulsive people who react immediately during conflict, empaths tend to absorb emotional information quietly before making a final decision. This is why an empath often stays silent before walking away permanently. Empaths do not usually give up on people quickly. Because they naturally try to understand emotions deeply, they spend a long time searching for explanations behind someone's behavior. They consider stress, trauma, fear, insecurity, emotional wounds, and personal struggles before judging someone harshly. They want to believe that communication can improve things and that emotional honesty can repair distance. This is why they often remain patient far longer than most people would. But patience should never be confused with blindness. While the empath appears calm on the outside, internally they are paying attention to everything. They notice repeated disrespect, emotional inconsistency, dishonesty, manipulation, and emotional neglect. They notice when effort becomes one-sided. They notice when conversations stop feeling genuine. They notice when someone apologizes repeatedly, but never changes their behavior. Instead of reacting dramatically to every disappointment, the empath becomes quieter. That silence is not emotional weakness. It is emotional exhaustion. At first, the empath may try to communicate openly. They may explain how certain behaviors hurt them. They may try to create emotional understanding and restore connection. But when those efforts are ignored repeatedly, something begins changing inside them. They slowly stop expressing every emotion because they realize their honesty is not being valued. Instead of fighting constantly for emotional clarity, they begin observing reality more carefully. This is the dangerous stage most people fail to recognize. Many individuals only become concerned when the empath finally leaves. But emotionally, the empath started leaving long before the physical separation happened. Their silence was part of that process. Every unanswered emotional need, every broken promise, every manipulative pattern slowly weakened the emotional attachment inside them. The reason this process is quiet is because empaths usually do not enjoy conflict or emotional chaos. They are not trying to win battles or dominate arguments. They simply want emotional honesty, safety, and mutual respect. When they realize those things no longer exist, they begin protecting their peace internally. Silence becomes a form of emotional self-preservation. Instead of begging for attention, they withdraw emotionally. Instead of explaining themselves endlessly, they begin conserving energy. Instead of chasing reassurance, they start accepting painful truths quietly. This transformation surprises many people because the empath once seemed endlessly patient and emotionally available. But emotional availability disappears when trust continues to be damaged repeatedly. What makes this even more powerful is that empaths rarely announce their final decision loudly. By the time they fully walk away, they have already spent weeks, months, or even years emotionally processing the loss internally. They cried privately. They overthought every detail. They replayed conversations in their mind, searching for hope. They gave more chances than anyone realizes. And eventually, they reached emotional clarity. Once an empath reaches clarity, their energy changes completely. The SAA. Me person who once fought to save the relationship becomes calm and emotionally distant. Not out of hatred, but acceptance. They stop trying to fix what only one person cared enough to repair. They stop chasing emotional consistency from someone committed to confusion. The silence becomes permanent because the empath no longer believes their words will change anything. This is why people often feel shocked after losing an empath. They mistake the empath's silence as a sign that everything is fine, when actually it was the final stage of emotional detachment. Empaths usually leave quietly because they already exhausted themselves trying to make the relationship work. And once they finally choose peace over emotional pain, they rarely return the same way again. Emotional honesty is one of the most powerful foundations of any human connection because it creates psychological safety. When someone speaks truthfully, even during difficult moments, the mind of the other person does not have to work overtime trying to decode hidden meanings, detect manipulation, or question intentions. The nervous system relaxes when reality is clear. There is no confusion, no emotional contradiction, and no need to constantly analyze what is real and what is not. This is why emotional honesty creates safety, while deception creates emotional chaos. When people communicate honestly, their words, tone, behavior, and intentions align. This alignment allows trust to grow naturally over time. Even when the truth is uncomfortable or painful, it still provides clarity. The brain prefers painful truth over uncertain deception because clarity allows emotional processing. A person can deal with reality, but they struggle deeply with confusion. Emotional honesty gives structure to experience, and structure creates stability inside the mind. Deception, however, disrupts this stability completely. When someone lies or hides important truths, they introduce inconsistency into the relationship. The words may say one thing, but the emotional energy says another. This creates internal conflict in the other person. The brain starts trying to solve a puzzle that has no clear solution. It begins questioning every interaction, every statement, and every behavior. This constant mental activity creates emotional exhaustion over time. On a neurological level, the human brain is designed to detect patterns and predict outcomes. Predictability equals safety. When a person is honest, their behavior becomes predictable, and the nervous system relaxes. But when deception is present, predictability disappears. The brain cannot accurately predict what is real, so it enters a state of alertness. This is where anxiety, overthinking, and emotional instability begin to develop. The body reacts as if something is wrong, even if there is no visible threat. Emotional chaos is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent but deeply damaging. It appears as confusion, doubt, overanalysis, and emotional tension. That never fully disappears. A person may still stay in the relationship physically, but internally they feel unsettled. They may smile, talk, and interact normally, but their mind is constantly processing inconsistencies. This internal conflict slowly drains emotional energy. Honesty removes this chaos because it aligns reality with communication. Even in disagreement, truth creates emotional grounding. Both people know where they stand. There is no guessing, no hidden agenda, and no emotional manipulation. This allows connection to deepen because trust is not being constantly rebuilt or repaired. Instead, it is being reinforced through clarity. Deception destroys this foundation because it forces people to question not only the other person, but also their own perception. When someone discovers they have been misled, they often begin to doubt their own judgment. They ask themselves how they missed the signs, whether their intuition was wrong, or if they misinterpreted reality. His internal self-doubt is one of the most damaging effects of deception because it weakens self-trust along with relationship trust. Over time, emotional dishonesty creates distance even when people are physically close. Conversations lose depth because one person stops feeling safe enough to be open. Emotional expression becomes guarded. Vulnerability disappears. The relationship may continue outwardly, but internally it becomes disconnected. In contrast, emotional honesty allows vulnerability to exist without fear. It encourages openness, emotional expression, and genuine connection. Even when difficult truths are shared, the relationship becomes stronger because both people know they are dealing with reality instead of illusion. That is the difference between emotional safety and emotional chaos. One builds connection, while the other slowly destroys it from within. The greatest consequence of lying to an empath is not immediate confrontation, anger, or dramatic reaction. It is something far quieter and far more permanent. It is the slow removal of emotional presence from someone who once deeply understood you. Empaths do not just listen to words, they listen to meaning, emotion, intention, and the unspoken truth behind behavior. They often see parts of people that even those people do not fully understand about themselves. That is why losing an empath through dishonesty is not a simple breakup or disconnection. It is the loss of rare emotional understanding. When an empath connects with someone, they invest deeply in emotional awareness. They remember small details, emotional shifts, patterns of behavior, and unspoken needs. They sense when something is wrong even before it is expressed. This creates a level of emotional intimacy that feels safe, grounding, and rare. Many people experience being truly understood by an empath for the first time in their life. It feels like being seen without judgment, without performance, and without emotional masks. But that level of understanding is built on trust. And trust is extremely sensitive to dishonesty. When lies enter the connection, even small ones, they disrupt the emotional clarity the empath relies on. At first, they may try to make sense of it. They may give benefit of the doubt. They may search for explanations that protect the relationship rather than destroy it. However, empaths are also highly aware of emotional patterns. When inconsistency repeats, they begin recognizing that something fundamental has changed. The shift is rarely dramatic at first. It begins with emotional withdrawal. The empath becomes quieter, more observant, less expressive. They start holding back the same level of emotional openness they once offered freely. Not because they want to punish the other person, but because their nervous system no longer feels safe in the same way. Emotional safety is essential for deep connection, and deception erodes that safety over time. What makes this consequence so powerful is that empaths do not simply lose interest easily. They usually care deeply, sometimes longer than they should. They try to understand the reasons behind behavior rather than reacting to it emotionally. They often give chances that others would not give. But every act of dishonesty slowly weakens their internal bond to the relationship. It does not break instantly. It dissolves gradually. Eventually, there comes a point where the empath stops trying to fix what feels unfixable. They stop analyzing, stop explaining, and stop emotionally investing in someone who repeatedly distorts truth. This is where the real loss happens. The empath does not leave loudly, they detach silently. And by the time the other person realizes it, the emotional connection has already been shut down internally. The deepest consequence is not losing attention, affection, or companionship. Those things can sometimes be replaced elsewhere. The real consequence is losing someone who understood your emotional depth without you having to explain it constantly. Someone who noticed your silence, your struggles, your unspoken emotions, and your inner conflicts. That level of understanding is rare. Once trust is broken, that depth of perception does not return in the same way. Even if the empath stays physically present for a while, the emotional connection is no longer the same. The openness closes. The intuition still works, but it is no longer directed toward the same person with the same vulnerability. In the end, lying to an empath does not just damage a relationship. It removes access to one of the most emotionally attuned connections a person can experience. And when that understanding is gone, what remains is often distance, silence, and irreversible emotional separation.